Welcome back. With thousands and thousands of deaths across the country from the virus, we find ourselves in another kind of crisis, one of grieving. Or maybe more accurately put, our absence of what we typically think of as grieving. I've wanted to talk about this for weeks, and I'm so happy to have with me someone who, as an undertaker, not only understands the processes of coping with death, but as a poet, he's also pretty adept at putting those thoughts into words and feelings. Among his works is the acclaimed The Undertaking, Life Studies from the Dismal Trade, and Thomas Lynch joins us from his home up north. Tom, I'm so glad to have you here, and I trust coronavirus has not darkened your door.
Thanks be to God, Devin. I think the only thing that darkens my door is my dog, Carl. And so it's very nice to talk with you.
Well, it's great. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it's nice to talk to anyone whose name isn't Carl. So.
Well, good deal. Well, I'm glad I can fill that duty for you this morning. I'm really curious. I want to talk about this, I guess, from two different, certainly those who are going through the stages of death, in many cases by themselves, but then also the bereaved who are doing this in a very different way from what we're typically find ourselves accustomed to. So let's start, though, with you. I'm just curious about your thoughts about people who are in the hospitals right now. We've heard these testimonials from nurses and doctors. I don't know that there's much more terrifying, things much more terrifying to people than the idea of dying alone.
I just think there's a title that's been replaying itself in my mind for the last several weeks. I think it was a writer by the name of Ted Rosenthal. May he rest in peace. He was dying of leukemia, I think, back in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, and wrote what I regard as a prose poem of photographs of his last weeks, and the title was "How Could I Not Be Among You?" And I think that phrase must be both in the minds of those who are suffering with COVID-19 and those who are bereaved by it, or who are keeping the difficult vigils that they can't keep in person. That's so hard. Mortality calls us to one another to hold and behold and embrace and gather. And when someone is dying, we want to be at the bedside. We think of it as a good death.
Yeah. So. We also, I think, we have seen many times over the years people who die in sort of mass ways, people who die in wartime, the many that we lost, of course, on 9/11. But I often wonder about the way that we have of dealing with knowing that we're sort of just a number, that a lot of people we're just being grouped in with what a lot of other people are going through.
It's so wise of you to see that as a deep wound to those who are dying and those who survive that death in the family. And because it takes away, Devin, one of the essential elements of a good death and a good funeral is the element of story, our story, which not only includes our biography, what we did this day or that day, but it includes our ancestors, where we came from, what we believe in, what we hold dear, what gives us hope. Our religious and our faith impulses are all included in a story that, in this particular pestilence, we're not allowed to tell because we can't gather to share it with one another. And it's such a deep wound to the impulses that grief calls us to get together and to commune with one another. It's, as my nephew Patty Lynch said, adding insult to injury. And the injury is deep, the insult is keen.
Yeah. Over the years, you've written and talked a lot about the idea of a good death. And I think that is a concept that we, as human beings in the 21st century, struggle with a lot.
Well, the numbers on mortality are convincing, aren't they? They hover right around 100%. But we've all seen, as you were talking about just a moment ago, we've all seen individual deaths that are overwhelmed by the circumstances, the act of terrorism, or the school shooting, or the pandemic, or the a plane crash or whatever the anomaly adds to our mortality. Sometimes we lose the individual stories in it, and
Yeah.
it's a great regret.
Let's move to the other side of the casket, if you will. And I'm really wondering what kind of real crisis we have coming with people who are not being allowed to grieve in the way that I think many people expect to get to do, whether it's being at somebody's bedside as they're passing away, or if it's just being able to come together for anything from an Irish wake to a very formal, gathering in a church. I really wonder what kind of toll this is taking on our own psychologies.
My father, the bed of heaven to him, may he rest in peace, used to say, grief will have its way with you. You can pay the psychologist, you can pay the clergy, you can pay the bartender, but you will pay. Grief will have its pound. I mean, grief is really the other side of the coin of love, and it comes calling, doesn't it, for the tax that is due on loving people. So people have said to me for years, it must be very difficult to see people in their grief and bereavement, and it is. It is a dismal trade, but you also see the deep attachments and real love we bear for one another, and the kindness and the courtesy that humans do to and for and with one another. So the time will come round when we can, exercise the large muscle investments we have to make in our dead, the heart and the shoulders and the shovel work and that type of thing. In the meantime, the bereavement letter, which used to be a formal ritual in Victorian times, maybe we should find again the putting pen to paper to condole and console with one another.
That would be a terrific tradition to see restored. Lastly, as somebody who has spent as much time thinking about this process as you have, I'm curious as to whether you have advice for those who are going through losing a loved one and doing it in such a shocking and foreign way than what they might have expected. What would you say is the best way maybe to face these days?
I've buried my mother and my father, people I love. I've never been through a grief that I couldn't embrace, that I couldn't whisper in the ear of, that I couldn't place something in the coffin of, that I couldn't bend and kiss the forehead of and pat the hand of. So I can't imagine the heartbreak, but I would say faith sustains us, whether the faith is in a Mother Nature or Father God or any of the close cousins of divinity that we hold to. And family and friends sustain us. Grief shared, Edgar Jackson used to say, is grief diminished. So we have to find people to help us do the heavy lifting. These times remove a lot of those options to us, but we'll find ways.
Let's hope, because yes, it is. There's so many people needing a hug right now, and they can't get one, no doubt about it. Thomas Lynch, it has been a real pleasure to talk to you. I so appreciate the time, and thank Carl for sharing you with us today.
I will indeed, Kevin. All the best.
All righty. The author and poet, Thomas Lynch. When we come back, we'll talk about about a loss. The loss of Al Kaline. Jeff Daniels has some special musical thoughts on that when we come right back.